Hail and welcome, one and all, to Robertson. After another little bit of a hiatus, welcome to the program today, Wendy. Ah, my fair lady, how thou dost look, the blue of your eyes doth. Wait, are they blue?
Sire, you look so well today, so well.
The blue of your eyes does fade the azure of the sky. Let us go yonder. So, folks, the get up today is all about our topic today: in bed with the Tudors. We're going to be talking about Tudor England today and some of the very interesting, could you say, intriguing, prohibitive sexual practices of the day. And not just for the titillating factor of that, but to show you how things have changed and the differences. So we're going to go down through the age a little bit here. And this is why I have thrown on my Henry VIII attire. This is actually paying a little homage to Uncle Dave. This is one of Uncle Dave's old costumes from the Renaissance Festival. And you can see all the tailoring work that he put into this. It's pretty amazing. So this is the kind of stuff we wore out there all the time. And this is what somebody would have worn 400 plus years ago during Tudor England. So, yes, Field Guy says, Lord Scotty of Intrepid Manor. That's it. So, Wendy, how are you today?
I'm here.
You're here.
No, it's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to be back. And it's been a little while. I'm not 100%, but I'm looking forward to having an hour with my favourite, medieval master over there.
I like that. Your favorite medieval master.
Yes.
So I like that a lot. And what was I going to say? Your bare shoulders. It's a bit wanton of you, but you're not showing enough cleavage to be in tune with Tudor England.
That's very true. And the thing is, I was actually, we have no idea what each other was going to wear tonight, but I actually thought I would.
She
wear
had no idea I was going to.
I had no idea. And we looked at my wench outfit just now, and you were like, "No, it's too modern. You can't wear that one."
It was a little too. Your wench outfit was a little too Daisy Duke. So. When we do our down south kicking General Lee show, perfect. So, but Sheriff Radio, says Sam Roberts. Sam, my son Samuel is here. How you doing, Samuel? He is my adult son, so he is appropriately aged for this show today. So, Sam, what do you think? Little sheriff doublet.
Drum roll.
Or Dave's Henry VIII doublet. I've got to tell you all, this has all the slash and pucker type of this is amazing tailoring on this. This would be the equivalent of about a $2,000 suit by today's standards back in Tudor England. The whole liner to this has embroidery, hand embroidery in it. It's this burgundy, this red royal burgundy lining, and it's got gold lacing all throughout. and I'd have to undo 20 buttons to show you. So this is all in the spirit of what we're going to be talking about today. You know, we see all these shows like The Tudors or Shakespeare in Love, great movie. The Elizabeth movies, even to a certain extent, with Kate Blanchett, and all the movies of this time. Think of even as far back as Errol Flynn talking about the Earl of Essex and his relationship with Queen Elizabeth. There is some thinking that she had a baby in private. Now, there's no historical record of that, but there is some thinking that she may have even had his child, and it was private and sent off and never came into question. So, but all of this, we see all these shows, Wendy, about love and romance in the Tudor era or Renaissance England or Europe, and yet, and it can get rather ribald. I mean, you look at even it's a little bit later in history, about 100 years later, but you look at things like the Three Musketeers and all the wanton sex that took place in some of those movies, even though when the movies were made for younger audiences, some of them, the Disney versions, you didn't see as much of that. But there was all this kind of sexual behavior. Now, I got to say, as a preface, and Wendy, you correct me if I'm wrong, but sexuality in human beings has has been going on since the first couple existed. And you have all down through history all the improprieties, from biblical improprieties, historical improprieties, all different kinds of religions, all different kinds of information out there talking about sex and how sex was just a governing factor of human beings because we're all sexual beings and we're all driven to that. But during Tudor England, when we watch all these shows and movies, read books and so on, you say, I'm sure all of that went on, but there was an official stance on things that came from all different quarters. And that's what we want to talk about today. What was sex like in Tudor England? Now, Wendy, you too, maybe we'll hit this, the differences too between nobility and royals versus the common folk. What would sexual activity have been like? What was permissible? What wasn't permissible? Ryan Gale, good to see you. He says HBO just came out with a documentary on the Texas Ren Fair. Yeah, it's doesn't draw me in, but I think there's some accuracy there, but it doesn't draw me in. We'll talk about that another time, maybe on my show. I want to watch it just to get ahead of that one. But Wendy, take it from here now. We're sitting in Tudor England, and let's say you and I are husband and wife, even king and queen, and we go to the privy chamber. Well, no, not the privy chamber. We go to
We could.
Yes, we could. But you come to the king's chamber, and a little, as they said in Tudor England, a little voodoo-do happened, a little shebang, a little shagging, a little whatever. What would that look like in Tudor England? What were the prescriptions, the prohibitions, and what might really have happened? So there you go.
I think people have a vision of the medieval England, which we're looking at medieval. Henry VII. If you're going into the Tudors, you're going from Henry VII to Elizabeth I, which is when the Tudors would stop. So in that time, you have Henry VII, Henry VIII, his 6 wives, Mary Tudor, his son Edward, who never married, and Elizabeth I, and Lady Jane Grey as well in that. And I think that, we're looking at a time in history where the church had a very particular view of what sex was supposed to be like. And, you're talking about, like, I'm looking the modern, you're the medieval, but in modern world, we can have sex where we like, how we want it, where we want it, with who we want it, on what day or night we want it. we have contraception, we have we have abortion, we have all these kind of things offers.
So sky's the limit nowadays.
Back then they had nothing. I mean, literally, it was very, very different. Childbirth was feared for many reasons, because if you were pregnant and you were about to have a baby, you would be locked away in a room. There would be heavy blinds and drapes. You'd have a tiny crack in a window. The fire would be going, no matter what sort of time of year it was, the fire would be going, because they had this belief that, something bad would happen. And you were only allowed to give birth on your back. So literally you weren't allowed to get on like gravity. So it was actually a very reserved time.
Your water's broken. You have an hour and we'll be watching.
Well, you were put away for at least, a month or whatever it was, And I think so when you get to that point of like, it's all very restricted, and you see the Tudors, the Tudors, and Jonathan Rhys there is obviously playing Henry VIII, and you see him shagging everything that moves and in every position. It wasn't absolutely like that. For instance, yesterday we actually were talking about that actually only the missionary position was actually the position to have sex in.
Now, does anybody out there not know what the missionary position is?
Well, I think they might.
I'm curious.
But it's like, and it had to be the woman on the bottom and the man on the top, not the other way around, because women seen on top was frowned, because it would see they would dominate a marriage, and also it made they didn't believe they could conceive while they were on top.
It would be like, honey, I like you on top, but you can't be on top, because that would show that you're dominating my marriage to you, and I own you. You're my property. So wouldn't that, think about that, folks. How many of you don't have to answer this question, but how many of you are sexually active? How many of you engage in the freedoms that we have nowadays? Do you go into your bed chamber at night, or your bedroom, with your spouse or your partner or your significant other, or anybody you choose, I guess, nowadays? And do you have to think of the rules? What are the rules of sexual engagement? What are the rules that I have to abide by now? Now, how often do you think those rules, Wendy, in Tudor England applied? Did they live by these rules, or were these rules? It's like them's just the guidelines,
That reminds me of Uncle. Oh my God! Sorry, my brain. I'm just reading something to get it ready. But Uncle Dave, I can hear his accent and voice in that as well.
Them's not the rules. Them's just the guidelines.
Rules are made to be broken. I would imagine they did break rules, but however, you are talking about God-fearing people. These people were terrified of.
These are people who lived that fear.
They were terrified that their immortal soul would be, God was all seeing, and their immortal soul would be, damned if they didn't follow. So yes, you have some people that obviously I imagine didn't care and did do it, and others that didn't. And I think, like you and I discovered, you could not have sex on a Wednesday. You couldn't have sex. I think it was sex. We're not allowed sex on Wednesday, Friday, or Saturday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, something like that. And you could only have sex in the evening, not in the morning.
I just get a picture in my head of, honey, I want you. I need you inside me. Let's see. Wait. Monday, Tuesday. It's only Tuesday. No, it's Wednesday. We can't do it. We got to wait till tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or it's before sundown. Let's wait. But they operated,
and they would have done as well, because at the end of the day, I mean, Henry VIII, if you used to use Henry VIII, for example, he had many mistresses, but he was a sort of guy that would want to he believed in chivalry. So he wouldn't want the woman just to give herself to him. He would want to woo her and chase her. And then, you know, when he actually had her, it was a better experience. And using Boleyn's sister, Mary Boleyn, she was one of his mistresses. In fact, they believe she had 2 children by him. And she was supposed to be known as the Great Whore because she'd been used by the King of France, so they say, because women were used as power. And it was like, if you were in the king's bed, you were in the king's ear, and you were in the king's favor. So, you know, and I'm just imagining what it must be like as a woman. You know, your family wants favor. They want more money. They have a daughter, and you have to go and sleep with someone you really don't want to sleep with. And at the same time, you know, how do you act? Do you act like frisky? Do you act like a chaste maiden? You know, what do you do? And also, you and I discovered yesterday, we were looking at that there wasn't waxing in those days, but they were saying, wasn't it, that pubic hair was seen as a sign of youth?
Yes. The more the, you know, sorry to put it, the bushier the hedge, the younger you were, you know,
apparently.
a sign of youthful vigor. And even that alone, that the church would have to come down and rule on that, or society itself would rule on that. Now, was that kind of like, do you suppose, and I say this, it's fun to talk about and all that, but I mean this seriously. Do you suppose that was a social, what would you call it? Not a moray, not even a value, just a social stance on something like, what was it, 20 years ago? You know, it had to be, pubic hair was like, women had to have the landing strip, or then 10 years later, it was shaved clean.
Hollywood,
then 10 years now lately, it's been like the total opposite, like going back to the 60s and the 70s. It's like, bring your machete when you come. And so I'm trying to find my way to the lost treasure.
Well, it's a bit like, you know, like the jungle, isn't it?
Yes.
But I mean, you know, thinking about it, let's as we were talking about with sex, it was all, you know, you and I probably never think about the church, and we never think about God when we have sex. We never think about our immortal soul.
Not in relation to.
We do not think about it. These people were ruled by the church, who says that 2 people can have sex if they are married for procreation purposes, and no sex on Saturdays or Sundays in case you get too turned on during mass, and only have sex in the missionary position, because anything else subverts the natural relationship between a man and woman. Do not get fully naked during sex, and you should be trying to have the least amount of fun as possible. So the church is saying to you, sex isn't fun, it is procreational. Now,
yes,
obviously,
it's not to be for recreation, it's for procreation. And that's it. And that's all the further you could do.
And I doubt many people listen to them whatsoever. I think they probably went, yeah, right, whatever.
That's the thing. The social standards didn't necessarily mean that the common person was actually doing that. Although you do know, like you said, as you were prefacing some of your comments, back then the church was very much a real thing. Religion was a real thing to people. The fear of hell fire was drilled into them from the time they were an infant. So those were the things that governed the way they did things. Oh my, if a husband and wife had sex doggy style instead of missionary style, you suppose there were some people, I'm sure, that went to confession that week and said, I had sex in not the missionary style. However, whatever kind of language they had to use. And it's so easy to make fun of it now because we are so sexually liberated in our habits and our practices now that all of this seems rather silly, but it seems silly because we're not in that societal, religious, personal mindset that they had back then. We've got to think in the context of how people thought back then. Now,
And also, as you said, like procreation, people needed children to pass on. They needed to have a son to pass on. Their goods and names. And a girl was used for building marriages between families and people. I mean, as I said, we're looking at Henry VII, who was Henry VIII's father. He was married to Elizabeth of York. You've heard of the War of the Roses, the red and the white rose. Well, the Tudor being the red rose, I believe, and the white rose from York. She was actually, there is some rumor that Elizabeth of York was actually pregnant when she married Henry Tudor, because she had to prove that she could get pregnant and have a baby. And she was actually not, I don't want to use the words fell up, but she was literally examined, and obviously, it was
sanctioned feeling up. It was sanctioned promiscuousness.
And to be honest, Princess Diana was made sure before she married Prince Charles that she was fertile and she could give him children. And I think that's a very common thing in the royal families throughout the ages. You had to marry someone. I mean, Charles II, using him for example, he had hundreds of children, illegitimate, never had a legal heir, because his wife couldn't have them. So if you had a wife that couldn't give you children, that was no good. But people think about, like, Henry VII was loyal to Elizabeth of York. It was a love marriage. He didn't really have much mistresses in any of that day. He was quite devoted to her, while Henry VIII, obviously people think he had all these great love affairs, which I'm sure he did, but actually he only had 3 surviving children after all the mistresses he'd had and 6 wives. He only had 2 male children. One was by Bessie Blount, and the other one was by Jane Seymour, and both of them were sickly and they died. In fact, his daughters were the strongest ones, by Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth and Mary, they survived. And I actually wonder the reason why they actually survived longer is because Mary wasn't out having sex with this one, that one, and the other. Neither was Elizabeth having sex, as they say, with this one. Maybe it was healthier, because in those days, I would imagine cleanliness was not next to godliness. And there was a lot of disease. In one of them, syphilis.
You and I talked about that yesterday in our conversation about all this. And could you imagine traveling back in time? This is the only context I could put it in, because you'd have to be outside of the context of those times. But could you imagine traveling back in time and going to a brothel for a guy, or getting engaged with sexual activity, a woman with a man back then? Cleanliness was still considered next to godliness, but there was ceremonial cleanliness versus physical cleanliness. Could you imagine the kinds of clothing they wore and the layers upon layers of things? Could you imagine, first of all, casual sex would take an hour, or at least 45 minutes to undress each other.
Oh, the skirts,
And imagine all those layers. Imagine what the odors the bodies could have. And imagine, you and I talked about this yesterday too. Let's bring it up. Menstruation.
Yes.
There were rules about menstruation, and also ways that women dealt with it. So sanitary, you couldn't go to the little machine in the loo and and for a quarter get your tampon. You couldn't go to the store and get your pads. It was usually even in the last century, early in the 1920s, I had grandparents that said, my mom used to have to use gunny sacks and potato sacks.
The douche, wasn't it? The douche. I think they were douches, and I think they did use juices.
Yes.
One of the things we talked about yesterday is that they used honey as a precaution to not get pregnant because honey was sticky. So they would insert the honey inside them. And then obviously when they would have sex, hopefully that, the sperm would be caught in the honey.
Right.
And they wouldn't get pregnant. I wouldn't say that was a fail safe, but
I would say it probably had a small percentage of effectiveness.
Those slippery little
not very high.
Anywhere. You know what those slippery little suckers are like? They get everywhere.
Yes.
But,
yes, they're dodgers. So.
But the thing is, as well, people was terrified of childbirth because they could die. They could die really, really easy, especially from sepsis and childbirth fever.
Yes.
So you were these women that went on to have 10 children. I mean, Catherine of Aragon had 12 pregnancies. 12, and only one child survived. And you think to yourself, well, what were they doing wrong? There is a rumor, and I've heard it, that Elizabeth, oh my goodness, she was Elizabeth of York's mother. Her name was Elizabeth too, who was married to the York before Richard III. I think it was his brother George. She's supposed to have cursed the Tudors that there would be no male heirs from them. Any male heirs they had would die, and only the women will survive. There's a rumor of that. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's very, very true. But contraception was like, it was frowned, as I said, to have the woman on top. You were not allowed to do the doggy position because it was seen you were imitating behavior of animals, and you were not allowed. I can't believe these words are coming out of my mouth. You were not allowed to use unnatural orifices such as the mouth or anus, and only a contraception like coitus interruptus or the newly invented Venus glove, which was a crude condom. It was forbidden. So withdrawal was forbidden. Using a condom was forbidden. So basically you were screwed. I mean, you were either getting screwed, getting pregnant, or getting screwed and hoping for the best of luck.
When we did the regiment, the red-coated Scots in the British Army in the 1700s, French and Indian War and things, Rev War, we would do little bits and I started to tell this story to you yesterday and we got sidetracked, but we did little bits for the audience. They'd come by and we'd have all the troops gathered up for their rum rations or whatever, the orders of the day. And there was one where he has his papers in front of him and he's talking about who gets what rum ration. Everybody would stand in line for their rum rations. And then he'd say, and now we've come to the company condom. And he'd hold up a very crude facsimile that somebody, probably Uncle Dave, made it, a crude condom. And they'd hold it up. Maybe Ryan's in the audience. He might remember this. They'd hold up the crude condom and they'd say, Private so-and-so gets the company condom for this fortnight, or for tonight. Good luck to you, Private. Here is the company condom. It must be returned in good shape. And it was a bit of a comedy bit at the same time, but it wasn't like you could go out to the local five and dime on the corner and pick up a package of 72 condoms.
And especially as it was illegal, because you're dealing with some of the Catholic Church before it went to the Church of England. And so it was very much frowned on. And for instance, in 13th century sex, it says there used to be a lot of public bathing. In fact, sex and bathing was so closely related that the phases such as lather up became 16th century expression for ejaculation. So I'm going to lather up, because a lot of
Sure.
brothels became bathhouses, and for instance, they would add rosemary to a bath. Lavender was frequently the smell of lavender was frequently associated with illicit Tudor sex, and prostitutes often smelled of it.
Even though lavender was used even by the Queen
Yeah,
Elizabeth to calm yourself, it was a stress reducer.
yeah.
Interesting.
And I think that as well, as a woman, you were frowned on as I mean, like, if you showed a leg, if you did, you were so frowned on no matter what you did. And
Yes.
now Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn were together for 7 years before he eventually married her.
Right.
I am guessing she did quite a few things in those 7 years without having full sex with him, to keep
Sure.
him satisfied. Because he
Yeah.
didn't take any other mistress in that time that he met Anne Boleyn.
So what do you suppose in Tudor England they did to get around the rules? If we're not married and we can't have sex, did they do all the things we do now?
I would
Only
imagine.
they kept it secret?
I would say so. I think masturbation probably was absolutely,
Um,
absolutely number one of
or even
frustration.
mutual masturbation. I'm
I would
sure that stuff
say.
happened. The act
Yeah.
of sexual intercourse within marriage was to be done, as you said, only in the missionary style, and there was no room or allowance for experimentation. You
Yeah.
just couldn't do that. The
Mm.
church also taught that the missionary position was the best way to conceive a male child, which you brought up.
Mm.
They believed that both men and women needed to produce seed to create a child. Therefore, it was necessary that a woman obtained an orgasm. A woman must have an orgasm,
Mm.
which one can suppose was at least a plus side for Tudor women. At least,
Well,
yes.
yeah. Because
Uh,
it wouldn't have been top on the list, would it? Let's be honest. The woman was there to, to be there for the pleasure of the man. I mean, don't forget, when couples got married, they were taken to their bedchamber, and people would often stay in and watch that they actually consummated that marriage. And very few couples were allowed to get away with it.
the
Some
father
were.
had to produce the bloody sheet to the rest of the people at the reception, if you will. Could you imagine that now in a wedding reception today, that the father of the bride had to produce a bloody sheet to show that she was virginal and he broke her, what's it, the hymen?
Yes.
And created a little bloodletting. I'm sure that was gotten around in many ways as well. We're going to stash a little bottle of sheep's blood in the bedroom so we can, do the sheet thing.
Well, I mean, apparently Prince Arthur, who was Henry VIII's brother, when he married Catherine of Aragon, was supposed to say it was a good night in Spain, meaning he was obviously, but Catherine of Aragon denied they ever had sex. Obviously, she was very wise to deny that, because obviously she married Henry VIII, and it was actually illegal to marry your brother's widow. But I do think that a lot of, for instance, with Anne Boleyn, she was accused of incest and being, flirtatious with other men, having sex with many different men.
Oh, yeah.
And, I can't even begin to imagine how women were seen. As the fact that, we were harlots, and for instance, we were talking yesterday about prostitutes in the medieval times, and whores, prostitutes, plucked their eyebrows. It was an evidence that they were a prostitute because of their eyebrows.
So, ladies, if you have beautiful, thin, plucked eyebrows, that was a symbol of being a prostitute.
And obviously, when we talked about the pubic hair, pubic lice was rife. I mean, you're talking about lice was around on a lot of people.
Wonderful thought.
I cannot even imagine the thought of actually pulling down and seeing little things like that. So what happened? They would shave it, right? They would shave
Was
it because
that part of the prohibition against oral sex?
ugh.
Was cleanliness? Could you imagine that? I mean, either way, male to female or female to male, and having to face that. And I'm imagining if there was lice, it probably was not as clean as we would think it needs to be nowadays. As we know, it ought to be.
Well, what was that? What was that thing we said yesterday? A well-thatched prostitute might
Yes,
be more desirable than a shaved one. So they actually preferred hairy
because
women.
shaved meant that you had to be shaved due to lice.
And can you imagine having to have sex with someone you'd married them and they had syphilis or they had another kind of
Oh no, no,
sexual
no. Yeah.
venereal disease, and you had to marry them, and your role is to be, you've got to have sex with this person. You've got to do it. You must be like, I don't know. I just can't even imagine. We do not realize how well we have it now, because and if back then, if you got pregnant out of wedlock, well, there was only two ways out. I mean, literally, you would either throw yourself off the nearest bridge, or a child would be taken away and got rid of quietly. You went to the country or something,
And of
and
course,
because
go ahead.
because you wouldn't want it, would you? You wouldn't want it. And there were so many brothels back then. That's the thing. You didn't know if your husband is going to a brothel, being with prostitutes, picking up something from them and bringing it home to you.
Right.
And then that could pass to your unborn child.
And I'm sure that can be even a thing nowadays.
Yeah.
There's going to be women who say, before we get serious, I really need you to go get tested because you have a past. And, I know people that have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And so now what about marrying age? The accepted age for marriage during the Tudor period was around 12 years old for girls. I look at my own daughter, Rowan. She's 12. Now she's got all the equipment is starting to burgeon. She's built kind of like her mom.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at the body itself and you say that body could possibly produce children, or at least to a man, specifically in that context of time, that was a marrying age, a birthing age, as soon as they started to look like they were of birthing age. So girls 12 years old, 14 years old for boys. And now a boy could produce a child at 14 years old, but does he know what he's doing? Does he know anything about his hormones yet? No, nothing. But most believe that 12 was far too young for a girl to be participating in sex. Thus, many young married couples were ordered to wait to have sex. So you're married, but you got to wait until have sex until the girl was around 14 to 16 years of age. So you could wait. If you married a 12-year-old girl, it could be 4 to 6 years or 2 to 4 years before they ever engaged in the act of sex.
Yes.
And of course, sex wasn't about recreation back then. It was about procreation. And there's a good example of this where this didn't happen. And it was with Margaret Beaufort, the mother of Henry VII. She married at just 12 years of age to Edmund Tudor. Sorry. Then she was, who was then 24. So she was half his age at age 12. Edmund didn't want to wait to consummate the marriage. And shortly afterwards, Margaret became pregnant at still 12 years of age. And, she was 13 when she became pregnant. And it's believed that due to her young age, the slender frame, the birth had a dramatic and lasting effect on her body. And despite marrying twice more, she never conceived another child. And although this is just one example where a girl was married at the very earliest age, it didn't always happen. And many times we think of people in the Tudor ages marrying in their early teens, but many men and women waited until their late teens or even into their 20s to be married for some of these very reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And sex was by the church, although we knew the church dictated that sex was only to be within the confines of marriage couples. It was clearly those people broke these rules. An example of this was Anne Vavasour, one of Queen Elizabeth I's maids. Anne gave birth to a baby boy in the maids' dormitory in Whitehall Palace at only 16 years of age.
Wow.
And could you imagine nowadays, by today's standards, 16, you're usually what, in a sophomore in high school?
Yeah.
But the father of the child was the Earl of Oxford, who at the time was married to Anne Cecil, because the daughter of Lord William Cecil, the Queen's most trusted advisor, and her Lord Burleigh, William Cecil. And for their crime, both Anne and the Earl of Oxford were thrown in the Tower of London for a period of time for the adulterous affair. But she had the baby of the Earl of Oxford, being a handmaiden to the Queen.
Well, I mean, Henry VIII's grandmother, she was 12 when she got married, and she had, it was such a bad birth that she couldn't have any more children. And you think about it, like a 12-year-old, as you say with Rowan, at 12, you would be married to a man maybe sometimes twice your age.
Right.
And you're thinking, oh my God. I mean, Catherine Howard, they reckon, was 15 when she married Henry VIII, and she was 17, I think, when she died. I mean, he was like in his late 40s, I think, when he married Catherine Howard.
Mm-hmm.
And no wonder she went looking elsewhere, because I imagine it would have not been a pleasant experience. And what are your options for contraception? Like, what do you do? We were talking about the Venus glove, which was apparently used to try and stop venereal disease and syphilis, because syphilis obviously is a terrible
What
disease.
was that exactly? The Venus.
So syphilis is it starts off with skin lesions on your.
Oh no, I meant the Venus thing you were talking.
Yeah, I'm
about.
coming to that. So basically, like, you would know someone had syphilis because you'd see skin lesions, and then eventually it would attack their brain. And they used to use things like mercury and stuff like that. Imagine to do it. But I'm just trying to look what the Venus glove was. The Venus glove. Condoms came to be used as a method of preventing, were made of fish gut and were washed and reused. They would have been tied to the penis by a ribbon or fine string. There was other rudimentary and bizarre methods of contraception. A lemon slice could be used. I mean, I can't even begin to understand how that felt down there. A lemon slice could be used as a cervical cap. And they suggested the pulp of a pomegranate mixed with alum, A-L-U-M, made a useful pessary which could be inserted before sex, and then a second one inserted afterwards. Alum was an efficient spermicide and also made the mucous membrane of the vagina contract. It could even restore the vagina stretched by childbirth back to normal size. They would also use rock salt mixed with an oily material. Can you believe that? To destroy male sperm. And they would put sponges in as well. They would use some sort of wool, as we said,
crazy,
with honey or wine or vinegar.
I'm sorry, it reminds me of the old crass joke. How do you make a hormone? You put sand in a petroleum jelly. Yeah. That's so.
And they also, like, they used to think that eating seeds or drinking something would help. You've probably seen it in House of the Dragon. Here's a tea that will get rid of, the pregnancy, etc. There were things they used, but one recipe to prevent contraception was marrow powder and made into an infusion. Another one was finely ground leaves of barren wort taken in wine for 5 days to prevent contraception. Its roots would cause you to be sterile. They would also use, God knows why they use these, berries of ivy, poison, and that would make someone sterile as well. So, I mean, this is real risk that these people were taking to not get pregnant. You know, they're using a lot of things.
And the only reason they listened to all of this was it wasn't so much if the government, I'm sure, came down, or your civil government came down and said and made these rules. There were a lot of people who would probably go, all right, gotcha, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If the church said it, though, there was, again, going back to what you said at the very beginning, there was that fear of the church and fear of God, because this is what they believed was true.
Yes.
And that's why people went along with this. But with all the prohibitions on sexual activity, it's because people still did it. I mean, it was rampant. But and by the way, it's clear that there was a contradiction in the church's belief about sex, as it appears to have been perfectly acceptable for men, such as Henry VIII, a married man, to take mistresses and to have sex for both pleasure and company that were apart from sex with the queen to make an heir. And the church condoned this. And it was commonly believed that sex during pregnancy could in some way harm or damage the unborn child, and thus was frowned upon. Yeah. And of course, I remember even in my own experience, the first time my wife was pregnant, not Rainey, my first wife, and remember she was pregnant and she wanted to go. And I'm like, can I do that when you are pregnant?
Is he going to put a dent in their head?
Yeah, it's like that. That was my question. And I said, am I not going to stab the baby? And she said, don't flatter yourself. Just let's go. You're good.
Yeah.
And so that's for whatever it is. But it was commonly believed that during sex or sex during pregnancy could in some way harm or damage the unborn child. And thus it was frowned upon. And the church also believed that abstinence within marriage was bad for the health. Hey, I kind of agree with that one.
It is.
Or at least the mental health.
No, it is.
That if a man could not have sex with his wife when she was pregnant, and he could not sustain from sex due to the effects on his body, clearly he had to look for sex somewhere else. And so, interestingly, the church did not comment upon such contradictions in their teaching. And when Henry VIII's wives were pregnant, he would often take a mistress, and the church turned a blind eye to these happenings. And how about contraception? It was illegal, according to the church. Still is today, is it not? I don't think there's been a new papal mandate.
Yeah, there's a lot of religion that still says you cannot.
And this is why, in part, why Catholics had such large families.
Yeah.
Contraception in the Tudor period did exist. It consisted of some of the things you've already talked about, Wendy, varied in different methods, including the man pulling, we call it the pull-out method.
True.
Contraception. It's like, oh, here we go. And I'm out. So it's withdrawing from the woman before he ejaculates. And the taking of herbs and oils, such as the oil of mint, the oil of rue, R-U-E, the oil of savine, honeysuckle juice. And the woman could also insert various things.
Wasn't there there was a plant, wasn't there? I can't remember.
There was a plant.
Plant.
She could insert things into her vagina.
into the ladies' parts.
into the ladies' naughty bits,
Yeah,
such as pepper.
yeah.
Okay, Wendy, if I were to hand you pepper and say, use this as contraceptive, could you imagine what that would do to you? How that would feel? So pepper, maybe it just made her not want to have sex. Contraception achieved. What else was there? Wool soaked in vinegar. Bundles of herbs, which would hopefully kill the sperm. So bundles of herbs. Could you imagine, or as you say over there, herbs?
Herbs, yes.
H is silent. The H is silent over here. And so, could you imagine though, having sex with bundles of herbs down there? A woman might insert beeswax. You mentioned honey to cover the entrance to the cervix. The man could also use it. And my question is, that stuff just naturally dissolve after a while, or do you have to rifle out the beeswax?
Well, if you know about honey, obviously using honey as an example, that's pretty sticky. And, I would imagine after a while, I would say you'd be bathing quite a bit, wouldn't you? Let's be honest.
You'd think. Hey, was pineapple, Elderberry said something about the Chinese girls ate pineapple.
That's the famous thing that that's the famous thing we say over here. Like, was it we ask men to eat?
Yes.
We ask men to eat pineapple, don't we, these days? That's the one.
Yes. Or asparagus. What is asparagus? What was that supposed to do?
Asparagus, that's supposed to help with fertility.
Fertility. All right.
It doesn't make
remember some movie. God, what was
always
the name?
Yeah.
Tom Jones, the book and the movie where Anne Margaret in the late 60s, early 70s, when that original version was made, there's a scene where she's laying half naked, seducing the main character and eating asparagus. So holding a penny between the knees doesn't work anymore, said Elderberry. There it is. Inflation, 100 pounds between the knees. So, so there were forms of contraception, but just imagine the medical marvel of an age that we live in. Now, you not only have contraceptives, you have birth control pills, you have the morning after pills, and we have all this stuff that's supposed to work. That's not shoving a stick up inside to kill a baby or to cause abortion. All the things that we have nowadays that are so different. And there was the beeswax I left off. And the man could also use a type of condom made of lambskin. This was the Venus glove you talked about. And by the way, you can still buy condoms that are made of calf and lamb intestine. It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
It's called now. It's been years and years since I don't like the line in the original Rocky movie with Sylvester Stallone. Right after he marries Adrian, his brother-in-law or somebody comes up, he goes, "Rocky, now that you're making all this money, I got one thing to say to you: condominiums." He's trying to talk to him about investments. Condominiums. And Rocky turns, "Oh, we don't use those." So, it's been years, shall I say, since I think it was the 1980s that I was given the natural condoms. They came in their own little individual plastic, like Tupperware tubs, only miniature. And you had to snap them open. You go, wow.
I mean, you think about the female condom when that came out. There was this great thing about, there's this female condom you can use, and it kind of looked like this sort of round thing here and a bit there, and it kind of like, it kind of was very noisy. And I think that, as I said, we take it for granted because we are we have so many choices. But also, let's think about impotence and obviously menopause. If women lived long enough to go through that, if you were impotent, Henry VIII obviously was seen to have had impotence, one because of his size and also other agents. So a lot of things that were given to help was quail's testicles mixed with large winged ants, bark oil and amber to be applied to the affected parts.
Back in the Dark Ages, we would have said that it would take being in league with a fairy or having a small troll living in your stomach. But now, due to modern technology, here in the Tudor age, we know that it is the wings of flying ants mixed with the testicles of quail egg into your wine that will prevent conception. So,
well, they would also eat aphrodisiac food, such as phallic vegetables like asparagus, and foods that inspire a bawdy pun such as apricots, as the Tudor called apricots, apricots. And for instance, because obviously they were phallic shaped, so they thought it was all good. And apparently one of Henry VIII's gifts to Anne Boleyn was a black satin nightgown, and she played very hard to get. So 7 years she held out. She might have bestowed some sexual favors to him, but she was never going all the way. And
he put the ape in apricot. So, and she wore the black satin nightie.
He wrote passionate love letters looking forward to kissing her pretty duckies, which was his nickname for her breasts.
Yes.
And apparently he was absolutely shocked by Anne Boleyn's sexual prowess. He was absolutely taken back. Because
where did you learn that, young lady?
Exactly. And perhaps the reason why she didn't favor the missionary position in bed is that her certain sexual positions were recommended to conceive a son. And apparently, he wouldn't even go near Anne of Cleves. He wouldn't even consummate that marriage because it did nothing for him. But then he met Catherine Howard, young girl, flirtatious, temptress. She'd been there, done it, and ticked it.
Late 40s, going for
long before she married him, and she managed to get the royal favor. I mean, she did. She was. I remember he used to call her his rose without a thorn. I mean, obviously, it turns out that she was actually unfaithful. Whether it was sexual, whether it was emotional, she was unfaithful.
Right.
But I do believe that he would have found being with perhaps a young, pretty woman like herself would have actually really reinvigorated the royal crown jewels. And off he went again. But Anne Boleyn apparently was the one.
A young woman who will invigorate my crown jewel. Yeah. So,
but it was Anne Boleyn, the one that he had the most wild sex with. And he killed her.
And she seemed to act as if she was experienced, or she was a good learner.
She was in France, and when you were in France, I mean, let's look. France is very different to English history. In France, and anything went. And we were talking yesterday about homosexual and trans and etc. How many men dressed as women and were gay in medieval times, and no one actually turned around and said anything?
And some of this conversation has also come up because of there was that mini series I just watched, George and Mary, and it's about the woman. It's a true story. The basis of this whole story is true. George, her son, she was a noble's wife who had died, and the man had died. She sent her son into the king, James I of England, Ireland, and Scotland, Mary Queen of Scots' son. And he was the king of England and the unified Isles. And but he was, he had to be gay by today's standards. This series did one thing. It showed the utter debauch that he would engage in. But at the same time, it was very sensitive to a man who lived in an age where you couldn't just openly admit that. But he was the king, so he could kind of do what he wanted. But this is the guy who also, to kind of cover that up politically, it commissioned the King James Bible, which we still have, the 1611 King James Bible. If you want to see a good series, be careful. It's a little debauched in parts, but it's very well done and very true to the times. It's about King James I and his male courtiers.
Well, he was known to be gay. I mean, he was known to be gay.
Yes, very.
He had to have children, so he would do his duty.
Yeah.
But he was, well known to have male lovers. He had his favorites. I think when we look at homosexuality today and we see men dressing as women and et cetera, it wasn't frowned on. Men acted as women in plays. Right. You only have to go to the Globe and see what Shakespeare's plays that went on. Men were dressed up as women. They were playing.
Now that's a little different than, I know a lot of the trans community nowadays likes to say, well, look at Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis in that Marilyn Monroe were in that movie, Some Like It Hot. And they played, to cover up, they played women in that. But they didn't do it because they were gay or trans or desired men or each other. They did it. The comedy was they were doing that to hide and to become part of this troupe. So I see a lot of things like that, even in history, in stories and movies, and the trans community will want to hold those up and go, see, they did it back then. Well, no, they weren't dressing in drag because they were trans or homosexual or whatever. It was a job. It was an acting job.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. By the way, on children being born outside of marriage, Catherine Howard, Henry the Wife's fifth wife, she's quoted as saying that a woman might meddle with a man and yet conceive no child unless she would herself.
Yes.
Meaning there are ways to prevent childbirth.
Oh, yes.
Now, the child born outside of legal marriage carried the stigma of being illegitimate. And although the child could be made legitimate through legalization in marriage, there would always be the issue of his or her birth outside of marriage. A king could even legitimize a bastard son if he had no heirs. But there would always be that question. He is not of the blue bloodline, so to speak. And sometimes women even went to the church or to court to try and prove who the father of their child was in an effort to gain support. And tragically, sometimes illegitimate children were given up, raised by the church, so that women would not have to carry the social stigma with her for the rest of her life. And if everyone had followed the strict rules of the church, then there would have been no cases of illegitimate children being born, and the general population of England would not have continued to grow as it did for the centuries following. And so no matter the period, men and women fell in love. They followed their natural desires and urges. They engaged in sex promiscuously for fun. Shocking. For fun. And so on and so on and so on. So,
and also, don't forget, without saying the word, the favorite word to describe a woman's vagina back in medieval times was a word that we use all the time now for swearing.
Oh, the C word?
Yes.
Yes.
That was how they described a woman. A woman, the girly bits.
That's the girly bits.
That's what their favorite word was.
There was a word, and I think it's safe to say it in this form. The cunny, they would call it.
That's right.
Or in French, I remember this. They showed this so well in the first Elizabeth movie with Kate Blanchett. the French ambassador. He was speaking in French, and he talked about, he says, and I don't know all the French words, but he talked about her le chat, her cat, her pussy, and le chat. He would say, "Mama," and mais oui, and so. By the way, I'm going to paste the link in the chat room if you want to call into the show and test our knowledge of Tudor sexual practices. And
not that we've actually got a degree in it, but it is
practically.
It is something that we enjoy, certainly learning about. And I mean, for me, it was always, I just think as a woman now, I mean, imagine having a period. Let's look at menstruation. You are, or you've just had a baby, and so you can't. Right. 6 weeks, I think you're not allowed around. I think it's 4 to 6 weeks. But if you had a period or menstruated, as they used to put it back then, you would have your packed so full of cloths and cloths, chaff, I would imagine, quite a lot, and cotton, whatever they used, wool, whatever they used, but you would still bleed. You might still drip, you might still, and what if you had blood clots or whatever like that? I mean, how did they deal with that? I mean, you used to use a thing. I mean, nowadays women talk about the cup. You can have a cup, you can put this cup inside and it catches everything. Maybe they had something similar like that. I don't know. But looking back, I think as a woman, it was not childbirth was not a thing you look forward to. Sex was there. You were the property of your husband. You were there to give him pleasure. And don't ever ask for any, unless you had a really good marriage, unless you were very lucky to have a good marriage. Mm-hmm. You're kind of screwed in that department. And like Catherine Parr, the last of Henry's wives, she'd been married to 2 elderly men. Both had died. And she was a rich woman in her own right. She was desperate to marry, I think it's Thomas Seymour, who would have been one of Jane Seymour's family. Right, and she was about to marry him when Henry VIII said, "Oh, hello, you're lovely," and married her. So when
being one,
like she had to marry him because she felt it was her God duty to see what she could do. When he died, she was allowed to marry anyone she wanted, and she married Thomas Seymour. And sadly, she had a child and died of childbed fever, like Jane Seymour did. Because imagine, like Jane Seymour, they reckon, where she had such a difficult birth and she was on her back, and the baby was very difficult to come out. She tore and got sepsis, and there was no penicillin. There was no, it was infection. She died.
So many women used to die in childbirth.
Why would you want to get pregnant? I mean, it would terrify me.
Getting pregnant was a terrifying experience.
And what if
social stigma?
And what if the baby was round the wrong way and you couldn't? I mean, it's a very scary thing. So I think when we look about the 14th or 15th century and going into the 16th century, and I know we said we'd look at Victorians to come, very different. I'm glad I'm not around in that time.
Yeah. Quite frankly. And due to modern medicine, my wife Rainey could have died twice out of the 3 children we have.
Yeah.
The first
I would have died for sure. Like my mum would have lost me in childbirth. And they pushed me around in the mum's stomach which gave me the problems with my spine. But at the end of the day, I think the woman would be so grateful just to get the kid out, and just get it out of me.
Right. My first children, my twin daughters, who are now 32, the Abby came vaginally, and that took about 4 hours of pushing, I think I want to say. Yeah. And Bryn was transverse.
Yeah.
And I remember the doc, she was a woman doctor. She was into her elbow up inside my wife, trying to help gently turn the baby without breaking limbs because they were so tiny and frail. They were only 4 pounds each when they were born. And so they were tiny. But my wife at the time, she would have died, and probably the twin would have died. So, back in the day. I'm going to take this off. That's irritating my ears.
But I have to say, it's been very lovely tonight to see you in your...
Why, thank you, madam.
And with the earring as well. It's been, I hope people found it a fun way for us to come back.
Yes, it was. And you and your indecent shoulderless thing.
No, showing my shoulders. I mean, I would have been absolutely cast out for that.
Yes, yes.
And to having an opinion of my own as well.
Cleavage was proper.
It was. And normally my cleavage, as I say, I'm always proud of my cleavage, but today it's not on show. And also, having an opinion of my own would have been frowned on very much.
Yes. Oh, how could you have a woman speaking? Yes.
Woman.
And, if anybody would like, we're about ready to, we could roll out of the show at any moment.
We can roll out. I think it's a good way to end and for us to have come back. I hope everybody's found it fun. We wanted something fun.
Yes. And we hope this was fun and enjoyable for you. It's a great topic. And, you can take anything and have fun with it, just like sex itself. Sex can be utilitarian, or sex can be fun, rollicking, and enjoyable. And so I think the same with history. You can take some of this stuff and look at the crassness of some of it, and the contextual ignorance of some of it, or the contextual inability of some of it to have, because they just, out of context, they didn't have the knowledge we have nowadays. Let alone the medicines or or whatever it might be, even tampons.
The thought of the pox, venereal disease, syphilis. I mean, just the thought of infections, no medication. I mean, syphilis would go to your brain and it would kill you. I mean, you had, and I remember going to the Mary Rose, which is the Tudors.
I've been there.
And they actually have all these gadgets that they used on board a ship, and this incredibly long poker looking thing which would have been used to go down a man's down the old hoo-ha, and basically really you look at it and you just think, I can't even imagine the pain and the lack of infection that would have caused. So I think we're very lucky to be where we are today, and we take it for granted, that's for sure.
I think we are.
But it was fun to go back in the Tudors. We must do the Victorians.
Yes, we'll do the Victorians next time. How about that? Hey, Kelly Strickland Hosek. That is a good friend of mine, a friend of my mom's as well. And so I know her. I hope you're not just getting here because we're just wrapping up.
Just going.
For the day. So, Wendy, as always, so wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
And thanks for your time, even when you're just not tip-top.
Yeah.
I know we didn't want to let another week go, but...
no, it's nice to be back, and and I'm having to not be my full self right now. I'm having to be very much like a 60-70% of myself, but it's nice to be here. I missed doing I missed doing the show, and it's nice to be in your company.
And it's nice to be yours. So everybody, thank you for being here. We're going to get ourselves out of here.
I'm going to bed.
You're going to go to bed. Yeah, it's what, 11 o'clock there? Or
it's just gone 11:15. Yes.
11:15. So it's time for you to turn in before you turn in to a pumpkin. So, Wendy, good to see you. And I will talk to you again on the morrow. And everyone else, you have a good night. And we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper.